I had taken Mrs. Prest into my confidence, and it was she who offered the happy suggestion that the way to become an acquaintance was first to become an inmate. Simply ask them to take you in on the footing of a lodger. The Mrs. Bordereau lived in Venice on very small means, unvisited, unapproachable, in a dilapidated old palace on an out-of-the-way canal. Mrs. Prest herself had been established in Venice for 15 years. In the early years of her residence, she had heard the elder Miss Bordereau was ill and had a suspicion that she was in want. She had gone to the house to offer assistance. The niece received her in the great, cold, tarnished sala, the central hall of the house, and did not even ask her to sit down. This was not encouraging for me, and I remarked as much to Mrs. Prest. She, however, replied, "Ah, but I went to confer a favor, and you will go to ask one. If they are proud, you will be on the right side." And she offered to show me their house. I had already been to look at it half a dozen times, but I accepted her invitation, for it charmed me to hover about the place. Geoffrey Aspern had never been in it that I knew of, but some note of his voice seemed to abide there by a faint reverberation. Mrs. Prest knew nothing about Geoffrey Aspern's papers, but she was interested in my curiosity. As we went in her gondola, with the bright Venetian picture framed on either side, I could see that she was amused by my eagerness. "One would think you expected to find in them the answer to the riddle of the universe," she said. And I replied only that if I had to choose between that and a bundle of Geoffrey Aspern's letters, I knew indeed which would appear to me the greater boon. One doesn't defend one's God. One's God is in himself a defense. I said that he was no doubt not a woman's poet, to which she rejoined that he had been, at least, Miss Bordereau's. The strange thing had been for me to discover that Miss Bordereau was still alive. "Why, she must be at least 100, I had said. But on coming to consider dates, I saw that it was not strictly necessary that she should have so far exceeded the common span. But she was very far advanced in life, and her relations with Geoffrey Aspern had occurred in her early womanhood. My fellow worshipper John Cumnor and I had done more for the memory of Geoffrey Aspern than anyone else, by opening lights into his life. His early death had been the only dark spot on his fame, unless the papers in Miss Bordereau's hands should perversely bring out others. There had been an impression about 1825 that he had treated her badly, just as there had been an impression that he had served several other ladies in the same way. Each of these cases Cumnor and I had investigated, and we had never failed to acquit him conscientiously of shabby behavior. He was not a woman's poet, as I had said to Mrs. Prest, but the situation had been different when the man's own voice was mingled with his song. That voice, by every testimony, was one of the sweetest ever heard. Every one of Aspern's contemporaries had, according to our belief, passed away. Most dead of all did poor Miss Bordereau appear, and yet she alone had survived. It was a revelation to us that it was possible to keep so quiet as that in the latter half of the 19th century, the age of newspapers and telegrams and photographs and interviewers. The only secret of her safety that we could perceive was that Venice contained so many curiosities that were greater than she. The gondola stopped. The old palace was there. "How charming! It's grey and pink," my companion exclaimed. It was not particularly old, only 2 or 3 centuries, and it had an air not so much of decay as of quiet discouragement. "Though you can pass on foot, scarcely anyone ever thinks of doing so," said Mrs. Prest. "Perhaps the people are afraid of the Mrs. Bordereau. I dare say they have the reputation of witches." I forget what answer I made to this. I was given up to 2 other reflections. The first of these was that if the old lady lived in such a big, imposing house, she could not be in any sort of misery, and therefore would not be tempted to let a couple of rooms. I expressed this idea to Mrs. Prest, who replied, "Dilapidated old palazzi, if you will go out of the way for them, are to be had for 5 shillings a year. And as for the people who live in them, they live on nothing, for they have nothing to live on." The other idea that had come into my head was connected with a high wall on one side of the house. A few thin trees with the poles of certain rickety trellises were visible over the top. The place was a garden, and apparently it belonged to the house. It suddenly occurred to me that I had my pretext. I sat looking out on all this with Mrs. Prest, who wished to know why I had not the resource of simply offering them a sum of money down. "Dearest lady," I exclaimed, "the old woman won't have the documents spoken of. They are personal, delicate, intimate. I can arrive at the papers only by putting her off her guard. Hypocrisy and duplicity are my only chance. I am sorry for it, but for Geoffrey Aspern's sake I would do worse still." And I told her what had happened to John Cumnor when he wrote to her. No notice whatever had been taken of his first letter, and the second had been answered very sharply by the niece. Miss Bordereau requested her to say that she could not imagine what he meant by troubling them. They had none of Mr. Aspern's papers, and if they had, should never think of showing them to anyone on any account whatever. She begged he would let her alone. I certainly did not want to be met that way. "But you will have to change your name," said Mrs. Prest. "Juliana lives out of the world as much as it is possible to live, but nonetheless she has probably heard of Mr. Aspern's editors." "I have thought of that," I returned, and I drew out of my pocketbook a visiting card, neatly engraved with a name that was not my own. "Doesn't it occur to you that even if you are able to say you are not Mr. Cumnor in person, they may still suspect you of being his emissary?" "Certainly, and I see only one way to parry that." "And what may that be?" I hesitated a moment. "To make love to the niece." "Ah!" cried Mrs. Prest. "Wait till you see her." "I must work the garden. I must work the garden," I said to myself 5 minutes later, as I waited upstairs where the bare scagliola floor gleamed vaguely in a chink of the closed shutters. I had been let into the house after pulling the rusty bell wire by a maidservant. I took my false card out of my pocket and begged her to hand it to her mistress, having first written on it in Italian the words, "Could you very kindly see a gentleman, an American, for a moment?" When the little maid pushed forward the heavy door behind me, I felt that I had a foot in the citadel. She padded across the damp, stony lower hall, and I followed her up the high staircase without an invitation, and took up my station in the sala. She flitted at the far end of it into impenetrable regions, and I looked at the place with my heart beating as I had known it to do in the dentist's parlor. Fine architectural doors were surmounted with old, faded, painted escutcheons, and here and there in the spaces between them, brown pictures, which I perceived to be bad, in battered frames were suspended. With the exception of several straw-bottomed chairs with their backs to the wall, the hall contained nothing else. I had not meant that I must myself cultivate the soil of the tangled enclosure which lay beneath the windows, but the lady who came toward me might have supposed as much from the way in which, as I went rapidly to meet her, I exclaimed in Italian, "The garden! The garden! Do me the pleasure to tell me if it's yours." She stopped short, looked at me with wonder, and then, "Nothing here is mine," she answered in English. "Oh, you are English. How delightful," I remarked ingenuously. "But surely the garden belongs to the house." "Yes, but the house doesn't belong to me." She was a long, lean, pale person, habited apparently in a dull-colored dressing gown. She did not ask me to sit down, any more than years before she had asked Mrs. Prest, and we stood face to face in the empty, pompous hall. Her face was not young, but it was simple. It was not fresh, but it was mild. She had large eyes which were not bright, a great deal of hair which was not dressed, and long, fine hands which were, possibly, not clean. I have been looking at furnished rooms all over the place, and it seems impossible to find any with a garden attached. Naturally, in a place like Venice, gardens are rare. It's absurd, if you like, for a man, but I can't live without flowers. There are none to speak of down there. She came nearer to me, as if, though she mistrusted me, I had drawn her by an invisible thread. I went on again, and she continued as she followed me. We have a few, but they are very common. It costs too much to cultivate them. One has to have a man." "Why shouldn't I be the man?" I asked. "I'll work without wages, or rather I'll put in a gardener. You shall have the sweetest flowers in Venice." She protested at this with a queer little sigh, which might also have been a gush of rapture. Then she observed, "We don't know you, we don't know you." "You know me as much as I know you. That is much more, because you know my name. And if you are English, I am almost a countryman." "We are not English," said my companion. I exclaimed, "You don't mean to say you are also by chance American?" "I don't know. We used to be." "Used to be? Surely you haven't changed." "It's so many years ago. We are nothing." "So many years that you've been living here? Well, I don't wonder at that. It's a grand old house. I suppose you all use the garden," I went on. "But I assure you I shouldn't be in your way. I would be very quiet and stay in one corner." "There is only one other. She is very old. She never goes down." "Only one other in all this great house? Why, you surely don't live in 50 rooms. Couldn't you let me 2 or 3? That would set me up." I ended by making my interlocutress believe that I was an honorable person, though of course I did not even attempt to persuade her that I was not an eccentric one. I said that I had studies to pursue, that I wanted quiet, that I delighted in a garden and had vainly sought one up and down the city, that I would undertake that before another month was over the dear old house should be smothered in flowers. I think it was the flowers that won my suit, for I afterward found that Miss Tina, for such her name proved to be, had an insatiable appetite for them. "We have never done anything of the sort. We have never had a lodger or any kind of inmate. We are very poor. We live very badly. The rooms are very bare that you might take. I don't know how you would sleep, how you would eat." "My gondolier can bring things round in his boat. Of course, in this great house you must have a second kitchen, and my servant, who is a wonderfully handy fellow, can easily cook me a chop there. My tastes and habits are of the simplest. I live on flowers." I left her with the understanding that she would consider the matter with her aunt, and that I might come back the next day for their decision. "The aunt will refuse. She will think the whole proceeding very louche," Mrs. Prest declared shortly after this, when I had resumed my place in her gondola. Her pessimism provoked me, and I pretended to have the best hopes. I went so far as to say that I had a distinct presentiment that I should succeed. Upon this, Mrs. Prest broke out. "Oh, I see what's in your head. You fancy you have made such an impression in a quarter of an hour that she is dying for you to come and can be depended upon to bring the old one round. If you do get in, you'll count it as a triumph." When I went back on the morrow, the little maidservant conducted me straight into a large, shabby parlor, with a fine old painted ceiling and a strange figure sitting alone at one of the windows. They come back to me now almost with the palpitation they caused, as the door of the room closed behind me, and I was really face to face with the Juliana of some of Aspern's most exquisite and most renowned lyrics. I felt nearer to him at that first moment of seeing her than I ever had been before, or ever have been since. The niece was not there. With her, the day before, I had become sufficiently familiar, but it almost exceeded my courage to be left alone with such a terrible relic as the aunt. Then came a check. We were not really face to face, inasmuch as she had over her eyes a horrible green shade, which served almost as a mask. I believed for the instant that she had put it on expressly, so that from underneath it she might scrutinize me without being scrutinized herself. At the same time, it increased the presumption that there was a ghastly death's head lurking behind it. Then it came to me that she was tremendously old, so old that death might take her at any moment, before I had time to get what I wanted from her. The next thought was a correction to that. She would die next week, She would die tomorrow. Then I could seize her papers. Meanwhile, she sat there, neither moving nor speaking. She was very small and shrunken, bent forward, with her hands in her lap. She was dressed in black, and her head was wrapped in a piece of old black lace, which showed no hair. My emotion keeping me silent, she spoke first, and the remark she made was exactly the most unexpected.
Our house is very far from the centre, but the little canal is very comme il faut.
It's the sweetest corner of Venice, and I can imagine nothing more charming, I hastened to reply. The old lady's voice was very thin and weak, but it had an agreeable, cultivated murmur, and there was wonder in the thought that the individual note had been in Geoffrey Aspern's ear.
Please to sit down there.
The chair she pointed to was at a certain distance. I took possession of it, telling her that I was perfectly aware that I had not been properly introduced and could only throw myself upon her indulgence. Perhaps the lady I had had the honor of seeing the day before would have explained to her about the garden. I could give her my word of honor that I was a most respectable, inoffensive person, and that as an inmate they would be barely conscious of my existence. Moreover, I should be delighted to give her references, guarantees. They would be of the very best, both in Venice and in England, as well as in America. She listened to me in perfect stillness, and I felt that she was looking at me with great attention, though I could see only the lower part of her bleached and shriveled face. She was silent a little after I had ceased speaking. Then she inquired,
If you are so fond of a garden, why don't you go to terra firma, where there are so many far better than this?
Oh, it's the combination, I answered, smiling, and then with rather a flight of fancy. It's the idea of a garden in the middle of the sea.
It's not in the middle of the sea. You can't see the water.
I stared a moment, wondering whether she wished to convict me of fraud. Can't see the water? Why, dear madam, I can come up to the very gate in my boat. She said vaguely in reply to this,
Yes, if you have got a boat. I haven't any. It's many years since I have been in one of the gondole.
Let me assure you of the pleasure with which I would put mine at your service, I exclaimed. She gave me no thanks for my somewhat extravagant offer, but remarked that the lady I had seen the day before was her niece. She would presently come in. She had asked her to stay away a little on purpose, because she herself wished to see me at first alone. I went so far as to say that I should be delighted to see her companion again. She had been so very courteous to me, considering how odd she must have thought me, a declaration which drew from Miss Bordereau another of her whimsical speeches.
She has very good manners. I bred her up myself. I don't care who you may be. I don't want to know. It signifies very little today.
This had all the air of being a formula of dismissal. Therefore I was all the more surprised when she added, with her soft, venerable quaver,
You may have as many rooms as you like, if you will pay a good deal of money.
I hesitated but for a single instant, long enough to ask myself what she meant by this condition. First it struck me that she must have really a large sum in her mind. Then I reasoned quickly that her idea of a large sum would probably not correspond to my own. I replied, I will pay with pleasure and of course in advance whatever you may think is proper to ask me.
Well then, 1,000 francs a month,
she rejoined instantly. The sum she had mentioned was, by the Venetian measure of such matters, exceedingly large. There was many an old palace in an out-of-the-way corner that I might on such terms have enjoyed by the year. But so far as my small means allowed, I was prepared to spend money, and my decision was quickly taken. I would pay her with a smiling face what she asked, but in that case I would give myself the compensation of extracting the papers from her for nothing. Moreover, if she had asked 5 times as much, I should have risen to the occasion. So odious would it have appeared to me to stand chaffering with Aspern's Juliana. I assured her that her views perfectly met my own, and that on the morrow I should have the pleasure of putting 3 months' rent into her hand. Our little bargain was just concluded when the door opened and the younger lady appeared on the threshold. As soon as Miss Bordereau saw her niece, she cried out almost gaily,
"He will give 3,000. 3,000 tomorrow."
Miss Tina stood still, with her patient eyes turning from one of us to the other.
"That is very good,"
she said. Miss Bordereau went on, addressing herself to me.
"And what time will you come tomorrow with the money?"
"The sooner the better. If it suits you, I will come at noon."
"I am always here, but I have my hours," said the old woman. "I will see you at noon, when you come with the money."
"Very good. I shall be punctual." And I added, "May I shake hands with you on our contract?" I thought there ought to be some little form. Besides, I felt an irresistible desire to hold in my own for a moment the hand that Geoffrey Aspern had pressed. For a minute she made no answer, and I saw that my proposal failed to meet with her approbation. She only said coldly,
"I belong to a time when that was not the custom."
I exclaimed good-humouredly to Miss Tina, "Oh, you will do as well." I shook hands with her while she replied with a small flutter,
Yes, to show it's all arranged." "Shall you bring the money in gold?"
Miss Bordereau demanded as I was turning to the door. I looked at her for a moment. "Aren't you a little afraid, after all, of keeping such a sum as that in the house?"
"Whom should I be afraid of if I am not afraid of you?"
she asked with her shrunken grimness. "Ah, well," said I, laughing, "I shall be in point of fact to protect her, and I will bring gold if you prefer."
"Thank you,"
the old woman returned, with an inclination of her head which evidently signified that I might depart. I passed out of the room, reflecting that it would not be easy to circumvent her. Miss Tina had followed me, and now stood there with a dim smile. She was not infirm like her aunt, but she struck me as still more helpless, because her inefficiency was spiritual, which was not the case with Miss Bordereau's. I waited to see if she would offer to show me the rest of the house, but I did not precipitate the question. I only observed at the end of a minute, "I have had better fortune than I hoped. It was very kind of her to see me. Perhaps you said a good word for me."
"It was the idea of the money," said Miss Tina. "I told her that you would perhaps give a good deal."
"What made you think that?"
"I told her I thought you were rich."
"Dear me," I declared, "I'm sorry to say it's not the case." We walked together along the sala. Were my rooms by chance to be among those that opened into it?
"Not if you go above, on the second floor,"
she answered with a little startled air, as if she had rather taken for granted I would know my proper place. "And I infer that that's where your aunt would like me to be."
"She said your apartments ought to be very distinct."
I listened with respect while she told me that up above I was free to take whatever I liked, that there was another staircase, but to pass from it to the garden story or to come up to my lodging, I should have to cross the great hall. This was an immense point gained. We ascended to the upper floor and visited a long succession of empty rooms. The best of them looked over the garden. Some of the others had a view of the blue lagoon above the opposite rough-tiled housetops. They were all dusty and even a little disfigured with long neglect, but I saw that by spending a few hundred francs I should be able to convert 3 or 4 of them into a convenient habitation. My experiment was turning out costly, yet now that I had all but taken possession, I ceased to allow this to trouble me. We looked out over a good many windows, for there was nothing within the rooms to look at, and still I wanted to linger. I asked her what several different objects in the prospect might be, but in no case did she appear to know, and I presently saw that she was too preoccupied with something else to pretend to care for it. Suddenly she said,
"I don't know whether it will make any difference to you, but the money you are going to bring is for me."
"Why, you'll make me wish to stay here 2 or 3 years. I spoke benevolently, though it had begun to act on my nerves that with these women so associated with Aspern, the pecuniary question should constantly come back. She went on,
"She wants me to have more. She thinks she is going to die.
Ah, not soon, I hope, I exclaimed with genuine feeling. I had perfectly considered the possibility that she would destroy her papers on the day she should feel her end really approach. I believed that she would cling to them till then, and I think I had an idea that she read Aspern's letters over every night, or at least pressed them to her withered lips. I asked Miss Tina if the old lady were seriously ill, and she replied that she was only very tired. She had lived so very, very long. Besides, all her friends were dead long ago. That was another thing her aunt often said. She was not at all content.
She thinks that when I'm alone I shall be a great fool. I shall not know how to manage.
I should have supposed that you took care of her. I am afraid she's very proud.
Why, have you discovered that already?
Miss Tina cried. I was shut up with her there for a considerable time, and she interested me extremely. It didn't take me long to make my discovery. Do you suppose she has some suspicion of me? Miss Tina's honest eyes gave me no sign that I had touched a mark.
I shouldn't think so. Letting you in, after all, so easily.
Well, don't you be proud, I said. Don't hide from me altogether.
Oh, I must stay with my aunt,
she returned, without looking at me. And at the same moment, abruptly, without any ceremony of parting, she quitted me and disappeared, leaving me to make my own way downstairs. Six weeks later, toward the middle of June, I was obliged to confess to Mrs. Prest that I had no results to speak of. "The bordereaux will lead you on to your ruin," she said. "They'll get all your money without showing you a scrap." It was a fact that up to that time I had not had even a moment's contact with my queer hostesses, except when I carried them the terrible 3,000 francs. Then I found Miss Tina waiting for me in the hall, and as she took the money from my hand, weighing it in her 2 palms, she inquired,
"Don't you think it's too much?"
To which I replied that that would depend upon the amount of pleasure I would get for it. Hereupon she turned away from me quickly, murmuring,
"Oh, pleasure, pleasure. There's no pleasure in this house."
After this, for a long time, I never saw her. It was as if she never peeped out of her aunt's apartment. I used to wonder what she did there week after week and year after year. It was more than keeping quiet. It was like hunted creatures feigning death. It seemed to me a proof of the old lady's determination to have nothing to do with me that she should never have sent me a receipt for my 3 months' rent. She had given me part of her house, and now she would not give me even a morsel of paper with her name on it. I foresaw that I should have a summer after my own literary heart. I had invoked the immortal Aspern, and he had come, as if his bright ghost had returned to earth to tell me that he regarded the affair as his own no less than mine, and that we should see it fraternally to a conclusion. It was as if he had said, "Poor dear, she has some natural prejudices. Only give her time. Strange as it may appear to you, she was very attractive in 1820. Meanwhile, are we not in Venice together? And what better place is there for the meeting of dear friends? See how it glows with the advancing summer, how the sky and the sea and the rosy air and the marble of the palaces all shimmer and melt together." My eccentric private errand became a part of the general romance and the general glory. I felt a mystic companionship with all those who in the past had been in the service of art. I used to watch the door that led to Miss Bordereau's part of the house, praying it would open, or thinking what treasure probably lurked behind it. They had not escaped me yet. They made my life continuous, in a fashion, with the illustrious life they had touched at the other end. I made a point of spending as much time as possible in the garden, to justify the picture I had originally given of my horticultural passion. And I not only spent time, but, hang it, as I said, I spent money on having it put in order. I was sorry to do this, for personally I liked it better as it was, with its weeds and its wild, rough tangle, its sweet, characteristic Venetian shabbiness. I had to be consistent, to keep my promise that I would smother the house in flowers. I would batter the old women with lilies. I would bombard their citadel with roses. Meanwhile, the real summer days arrived, and as I look back upon them, they seemed to me almost the happiest of my life. I had an arbor arranged, and I carried out books and portfolios, and worked and waited and hoped, while the golden hours elapsed and the inscrutable old palace turned pale, and then, as the day waned, began to flush in it, and my papers rustled in the wandering breeze of the Adriatic. I sat spinning theories about Miss Bordereau in my arbor, while the bees droned in the flowers. Most readers of certain of Aspern's poems had taken for granted that Juliana had not always adhered to the steep footway of renunciation. There hovered about her name a perfume of reckless passion, an intimation that she had not been exactly as the respectable young person in general. Was this a sign that he had betrayed her? I was seldom at home in the evening, for when I attempted to occupy myself in my apartments, the lamplight brought a swarm of noxious insects, and it was too hot for closed windows. Accordingly, I spent the late hours either on the water or in front of Florian's cafe, eating ices, listening to music, talking with acquaintances. I used sometimes on these occasions to think of the Misses Bordereau, and of the pity of their being shut up in stuffy apartments in the Venetian July. Poor Miss Tina would have enjoyed one of Florian's ices, I was sure. Sometimes I even had thoughts of carrying one home to her. Fortunately, my patience bore fruit, and I was not obliged to do anything so ridiculous. One evening, about the middle of July, I came in earlier than usual and made my way into the garden. The breath of the place was delicious. I looked at the windows of the palace, but everything was dim, and everything was still. I became aware on reaching the end of the garden that Miss Tina was seated in a little bower. As she rose, she spoke to me.
"Oh, dear, I'm so very glad you've come."
She came out of the arbor almost as if she were going to throw herself into my arms. I hasten to add that she did nothing of the kind. It was a gratification to her to see me, and presently she told me why. Because she was nervous when she was out of doors at night alone. The plants and bushes looked so strange in the dark, and there were all sorts of queer sounds. She could not tell what they were, like the noises of animals. "You speak as if you were lost in the backwoods," I said, laughing. "You and your poor aunt are worse off than Carmelite nuns in their cells. Should you mind telling me how you exist without air, without exercise, without any sort of human contact?"
"Before you came, we were not so private, but I never had been out at night."
"Never in these fragrant alleys, blooming here under your nose?"
"Ah," said Miss Tina, "they were never nice till now."
I asked her why, since she thought my garden nice, she had never thanked me in any way for the flowers I had been sending up in such quantities for the previous 3 weeks.
"Why, I didn't know they were for me."
"They were for both of you. Why should I make a difference?" Miss Tina reflected, as if she might be thinking of a reason for that, but she failed to produce one. Instead of this, she asked abruptly, "Why in the world do you want to know us?" "That question is your aunt's. It isn't yours. You wouldn't ask it if you hadn't been put up to it. She has put the idea into your head that I am insufferably pushing."
"She told me to come out tonight. She has told me very often," said Miss Tina. "It is I who wouldn't come. I don't like to leave her."
"Is she too weak? Is she failing?" I demanded, with more emotion, I think, than I intended to show. To turn the matter off, I continued genially, "Do let us sit down together comfortably somewhere, and you will tell me all about her." We found a bench less secluded than the one in the arbor, and we were still sitting there when I heard midnight ring out. Miss Tina talked freely, not even taking advantage of certain longish pauses to say she thought she had better go in. It was almost as if she were waiting for something I might say to her, and intended to give me my opportunity. She told me that her aunt had been less well for a good many days. She was weaker, Yet more than ever before, she wished to be left alone. Miss Tina confided to me that at present her aunt was so motionless that she sometimes feared she was dead. Moreover, she took hardly any food. One couldn't see what she lived on. It evidently drew her out simply to feel me listen and care. She almost chattered as she spoke of the brilliant life they had led when they first came to live in Venice. There was scarcely a week that they had not some visitor, and her aunt and she used to make them some little present, small things that she, Miss Tina, made herself, like paper lampshades or those woolen things that in cold weather were worn on the wrists. The last few years there had not been many presents. She could not think what to make, and her aunt had lost her interest. If she had not been so decent, her references would have seemed to carry one back to the queer Rococo Venice of Casanova. I found myself falling into the error of thinking of her too as one of Geoffrey Aspern's contemporaries. Yet it was possible, I said to myself, that she had not even heard of him, until I remembered that we had believed the letter received by Cumnor to be in the handwriting of the niece. If it had been dictated to her, she had, of course, to know what it was about. When midnight sounded, Miss Tina got up. "When shall I see you again?" I asked before she went in, to which she replied with promptness that she should like to come out the next night. "I shall like the flowers better now that I know they are also meant for me." "How could you have doubted it? If you will tell me the kind you like best, I will send a double lot of them." "Oh, I like them all best." Then she went on familiarly. "Shall you study? Shall you read and write when you go up to your rooms?" "I read a good deal, but I don't often write." It seemed to me that I could not wait longer, that I really must take a sounding. So I went on. "In general, before I go to sleep, I read some great poet. In 9 cases out of 10, it's a volume of Geoffrey Aspern." I watched her well as I pronounced that name, but I saw nothing wonderful. Why should I, indeed? Was not Geoffrey Aspern the property of the human race? "Oh, we read him. We have read him," she quietly replied. "He is my poet of poets. I know him almost by heart." For an instant, Miss Tina hesitated. Then her sociability was too much for her. "Oh, that's nothing. My aunt used to know him." She paused an instant, and I wondered what she was going to say. "To know him as a visitor. He used to call on her and take her out." "Mercy on us," I exclaimed. "Why didn't you tell me before? I should so like to ask her about him." "She wouldn't care for that. She wouldn't tell you," Miss Tina replied. "I don't care what she cares for. She must tell me. It's not a chance to be lost." "Oh, you should have come 20 years ago. Then she still talked about him. She said he was a god." It stirred me deeply as she dropped the words into the summer night. It seemed such a direct testimony. Fancy, I murmured. And then, "Tell me this, please. Has she got a portrait of him? They are distressingly rare." "A portrait? I don't know," said Miss Tina, and now there was discomfiture in her face. "Well, good night," she added, and she turned into the house. Good night, I replied, keeping beside her as she went to get her light. "Surely you would know, shouldn't you, if she had one?" "If she had what?" the poor lady asked, looking at me queerly over the flame of her candle. A portrait of the god. I don't know what I wouldn't give to see it." "I don't know what she has got. She keeps her things locked up." And Miss Tina went away toward the staircase, with a sense, evidently, that she had said too much. She stopped short and turned round, looking at me across the dusky space. "Do you write?" There was a shake in her voice. She could scarcely bring out what she wanted to ask. "Do you write about him? Do you pry into his life?" I thought I had allowed for the falsehoods I should have to tell, but I found that in fact when it came to the point I had not. Besides, now that I had an opening, there was a kind of relief in being frank. After a moment's hesitation, I answered, "Yes, I have written about him, and I am looking for more material." "In heaven's name, have you got any?"
"Santo Dio!"
she exclaimed, without heeding my question, and she hurried upstairs and out of sight. I might count upon her in the last resort, but for the present she was visibly alarmed. The proof of it was that she began to hide again, so that I kept missing her. I found my patience ebbing, and after 4 or 5 days of this, I told the gardener to stop the floral tributes. One afternoon, as I came down from my quarters to go out, I found Miss Tina in the sala. She told me that Miss Bordereau wished to see me, and she led me to the door of her aunt's apartment. I wondered what had made Miss Bordereau change so suddenly. "I only want to be clear as to whether you have repeated to her what I told you about Geoffrey Aspern, that I am looking for materials."
"If I had told her, do you think she would have sent for you?"
"If she wants to keep him to herself, she might have sent for me to tell me so."
"She won't speak of him,"
said Miss Tina. Then as she opened the door, she added in a lower tone,
"I have told her nothing."
The old woman was sitting in the same place in which I had seen her last, with a mystifying bandage over her eyes. There was something so grim in her aspect that I ceased to feel any doubt as to her knowing my secret, though I did not suspect that Miss Tina had betrayed me. The old woman had turned me over and over in the long, still hours, and she had guessed. I asked after Miss Bordereau's health. She replied that it was good enough, that it was a great thing to be alive. "Oh, as to that, it depends upon what you compare it with," I exclaimed, laughing.
"I don't compare. I don't compare. If I did that, I should have given everything up long ago."
I liked to think that this was a subtle allusion to the rapture she had known in the society of Geoffrey Aspern.
"It's about the beautiful flowers,"
said the old lady.
"I ought to have thanked you for them before."
"I'm afraid you have not had many of late, but they shall begin again immediately."
"I suppose you know you can sell those you don't use,"
Miss Bordereau went on. "Oh, my gardener disposes of them, and I ask no questions."
"I would ask a few, I can promise you,"
said Miss Bordereau. And it was the first time I had heard her laugh. I could not get used to the idea that this vision of pecuniary profit was what drew out the divine Juliana most. "Come into the garden yourself and pick them. They are all for you," I pursued, addressing Miss Tina. "Come as often as you like."
"You must come up and fetch her,"
said the old woman, to my stupefaction.
"That odd arbour you have made in the corner would be a capital place for her to sit."
"Wouldn't it be possible for you to come down there yourself?" I asked. "Wouldn't it do you good to sit there in the shade, in the sweet air?"
"Oh, sir, when I move out of this, it won't be to sit in the air, and I'm afraid that any that may be stirring around me won't be particularly sweet. But that won't be just yet,"
Miss Bordereau continued cannily. As if to put our companion in a light more favourable, Miss Tina said to me,
"Didn't I tell you the other night that she had sent me out?" "Do you teach her to pity herself?"
Miss Bordereau demanded before I had time to answer this appeal.
"She has a much easier life than I had when I was her age."
"You must remember that it has been quite open to me to think you rather inhuman."
"Inhuman? That's what the poets used to call the women 100 years ago. Don't try that. You won't do as well as they," Juliana declared. "There is no more poetry in the world, that I know of at least. But I won't bandy words with you," she pursued. "You have made me talk. Talk! It isn't good for me at all."
I got up at this, but she detained me to ask,
"Do you remember that you offered us the use of your gondola?"
And when I assented, she broke out,
"Why don't you take that girl out in it and show her the place?"
"Oh, dear aunt, what do you want to do with me?" cried the girl with a piteous quaver.
"I know all about the place." "Haven't we heard that there have been all sorts of changes in all these years? You ought to see them, and at your age, I don't mean because you're so young, you ought to take the chances that come. Take her to the piazza. It used to be very pretty,
Miss Bordereau continued, addressing herself to me.
Let her look at the shops. She may take some money. She may buy what she likes.
Poor Miss Tina had got up, discountenanced and helpless, and it seemed that the old woman was amusing herself at our expense. I lost no time in saying that if she would do me the honor to accept the hospitality of my boat, I would engage that she should not be bored. She looked away from me out of the window, as if she were going to cry. As I made my obeisance to the old lady, I asked her if she would kindly permit me to see her again. For a moment she said nothing. Then she inquired,
"Is it very necessary to your happiness?"
"It diverts me more than I can say."
"You are wonderfully civil. Don't you know it almost kills me?"
"How can I believe that when I see you more animated, more brilliant than when I came in?"
"That is very true, Aunt," said Miss Tina. "I think it does you good." "Isn't it touching, the solicitude we each have that the other shall enjoy herself?"
sneered Miss Bordereau.
"Don't try to pay me a compliment. I have been spoiled. My door is shut, but you may sometimes knock."
Towards the end of the week, one lovely evening after dinner, Miss Tina stepped into my gondola. We swept in the course of 5 minutes into the Grand Canal, floating long and far, and though Miss Tina gave no voice to her satisfaction, I felt that she surrendered herself. The gondola moved with slow strokes, and she listened to the plash of the oars, which grew louder and more musically liquid as we passed into narrow canals, as if it were a revelation of Venice. At last she asked, with the shy impatience of a child, "Are we not really going to the piazza? That's what I want to see." I immediately gave the order that we should go straight. As some time still passed, however, she said suddenly, "I have found out what is the matter with my aunt. She is afraid you will go." "What has put that into her head?" "She has had an idea you have not been happy. That is why she is different now. She wants you to stay." "I suppose you mean on account of the rent," I remarked candidly. Miss Tina's candor showed itself a match for my own. "Yes, you know, so that I shall have more." "How much does she want you to have?" I asked, laughing. "She ought to fix the sum so that I may stay till it's made up." "Oh, that wouldn't please me," said Miss Tina. "It would be unheard of, your taking that trouble." "But suppose I should have my own reasons for staying in Venice?" "Then I think you would do well to give up your reasons and go away altogether." "Dear Miss Tina," I said, "it's not so easy to give them up." She made no immediate answer to this, but after a moment she broke out, "I think I know what your reasons are. My aunt would never consent to what you want. She has been asked. She has been written to. It made her fearfully angry." "Then she has got papers of value?" "Oh, she has got everything," sighed Miss Tina with a curious weariness. For some minutes I was too agitated to speak, and in the interval the gondola approached the piazzetta. Her spirits revived at the sight of the bright shop windows, and she lingered, asking me what I thought of things, theorizing about prices. It was a splendid night, and all the world was out of doors. I saw that Miss Tina enjoyed it. She had forgotten what an attractive thing the world is. She became silent, as if she were thinking with a secret sadness of opportunities forever lost. And this gave me a chance to say to her, "Did you mean a while ago that your aunt has a plan of keeping me on by admitting me occasionally to her presence?" "She thinks it will make a difference with you if you sometimes see her. She wants you so much to stay that she is willing to make that concession." "If you have not told her what I said to you the other night about the papers, may she not at least have guessed it?" "I don't know. She is very suspicious," said Miss Tina. "It's on account of something ages ago, before I was born, in her life." I felt for the moment that she would have been more satisfactory if she had been less ingenuous. Do you suppose it's something to which Geoffrey Aspern's letters and papers have reference?
I dare say it is, my companion exclaimed. I have never looked at any of those things, but I have seen them when she has had them out.
Does she have them out often?
Not now, but she used to. She is very fond of them.
In spite of their containing painful memories?
Oh, I don't think they are painful.
You mean you don't think they affect her reputation? At this, a singular look came into the face of Miss Bordereau's niece. A kind of confession of helplessness, an appeal to me to deal fairly, generously with her.
Do you mean that she did something bad?
I felt almost as one who corrupts the innocence of youth. Heaven forbid I should say so, and it's none of my business. Besides, if she did, it was in other ages, in another world. But why should she not destroy her papers?
Oh, she loves them too much.
Even now, when she may be near her end?
Perhaps when she's sure of that, she will.
Well, Miss Tina, I said, it's just what I should like you to prevent. Couldn't you get them away from her?
And give them to you?
This put the case very crudely, though I'm sure there was no irony in her intention.
Oh, I mean that you might let me look them over.
It is simply that they would be of such immense interest to the public as a contribution to Geoffrey Aspern's history.
After a moment she said, "There was a gentleman who some time ago wrote to her in very much those words. He also wanted her papers."
"And did she answer him?" I asked.
"Only when he had written 2 or 3 times. She said he was a devil. She made me write to him."
"And what did you say?"
"I wrote what she bade me. I told him there were no papers at all."
"I hope I shall not pass for a devil."
"It will depend upon what you ask me to do for you," said Miss Tina, smiling.
I laid my hand on her arm. "What I want of you is a general promise to help me."
"Oh, how can I?
How can I?" she asked. "This is the main thing, to watch her carefully and warn me in time before she commits that horrible sacrilege."
"I can't watch her when she makes me go out."
"Mercy on us, do you think she will have done anything tonight?"
"I don't know. She is very cunning."
"Are you trying to frighten me?" I asked. I felt this inquiry sufficiently answered when my companion murmured in a musing, almost envious way,
"Oh, but she loves them. She loves them."
To obtain more of that balm, I said, "If she shouldn't intend to destroy the objects we speak of before her death, she will probably have made some disposition by will. Hasn't she made a will for your benefit? Might I ask, since we are really talking things over, what you and she live on?"
"Oh, some money that comes from America, from a lawyer. It isn't much."
"And won't she have disposed of that?" My companion blushed.
"I believe it's mine," she said. "She had a lawyer once, ever so long ago, and some people came and signed something."
"And you were not asked to sign? Well then," I argued rapidly and hopefully, "it is because you are the legatee. She has left all her documents to you."
"If she has, it's with very strict conditions."
"Oh, of course you will have to abide by the terms," I said. And she uttered nothing to mitigate the severity of this conclusion. Nevertheless, later, on our return, which had taken place almost in silence, she said to me abruptly,
"I will do what I can to help you."
I was grateful for this, but it did not keep me from remembering that night in a worried waking hour that I now had her word for it that the old woman was full of craft. I almost figured to myself that it was Miss Tina's duty to keep me informed whether or no Miss Bordereau had sacrificed her treasures. But as she gave no sign, I lost patience. I sent late one afternoon to ask if I might pay the ladies a visit, and my servant came back with surprising news. Miss Bordereau could be approached without the least difficulty. I descended and found that the old lady had been wheeled forth into the world and had a certain air of being prepared again to have converse with it. The window at which she sat had the afternoon shade, and she could see the pleasant garden, where the summer sun had by this time dried up too many of the plants. She could see the yellow light and the long shadows.
"Have you come to tell me that you will take the rooms for 6 months more?"
she asked as I approached her. Juliana's desire to make our acquaintance lucrative had been a false note in my image of the woman who had inspired a great poet with immortal lines. But I recognized that it was I who had put into her head that she had the means of making money, and had taught her to calculate. "Oh, dear madam, what an imagination you have! What an intellectual sweep! I am a poor devil of a man of letters who lives from day to day. How can I take palaces by the year? I don't know whether 6 months hence I shall have bread to put in my mouth. I have treated myself for once. It has been an immense luxury. But when it comes to going on—"
"Are your rooms too dear? If they are, you can have more for the same money," Juliana responded.
"Well, yes, since you ask me, they are too dear," I said. "Evidently you suppose me richer than I am." She looked at me in her barricaded way.
"If you write books, don't you sell them?"
"Do you mean, don't people buy them?" "A little. Not so much as I could wish."
"Perhaps you don't choose good subjects. What do you write about?"
About the books of other people. I'm a critic, an historian, in a small way." I wondered what she was coming to.
"And what other people now?"
"Oh, the great writers mainly, the great philosophers and poets of the past, those who are dead and gone and can't speak for themselves."
"And what do you say about them?"
"I say they sometimes attach themselves to very clever women." It seemed to be tolerably obvious that she knew my secret. Why, therefore, drag the matter out? But she did not take what I had said as a confession. She only asked,
"Do you think it's right to rake up the past?"
"I don't know that I know what you mean by raking it up, but how can we get at it unless we dig a little?"
"Oh, I like the past, but I don't like critics," the old woman declared with her fine tranquillity.
"Neither do I, but I like their discoveries."
"Aren't they mostly lies?"
"The lies are what they sometimes discover," I said, smiling at the quiet impertinence of this. "They often lay bare the truth."
"The truth is God's. Who can judge of it? Who can say?"
"But if we give up trying, what becomes of all the fine things? What becomes of the work of the great philosophers and poets? It is all vain words if there is nothing to measure it by."
"You talk as if you were a tailor,"
said Miss Bordereau whimsically.
"This house is very fine. The proportions are magnificent. When your man came to learn if I would see you, I was on the point of sending for you. I wanted to judge what I'm letting you have. I don't believe you often have lived in such a house, eh?"
"I can't often afford to," I said.
"Well then, how much will you give for 6 months?"
I was on the point of exclaiming, "Don't, Juliana, for his sake, don't." But I controlled myself and asked, less passionately, "Why should I remain so long as that?"
"I thought you liked it,"
said Miss Bordereau with her shriveled dignity. "So I thought I should." For a moment she said nothing more, and I left my own words to suggest to her what they might.
"If you don't think we have treated you well enough, perhaps we can discover some way of treating you better."
I said I had not a grain of complaint to make, and could anything have exceeded Miss Tina's graciousness in accompanying me a few nights before to the piazza? At this the old woman went on,
"Well, you brought it on yourself. She is a very nice girl. Except for me, today, she has not a relation in the world."
Did she, by describing her niece as amiable and unencumbered, wish to represent her as a catch? I was willing to pay the venerable woman with whom my pecuniary dealings were such a discord twice as much as any other padrona di casa would have asked, but I was not willing to pay her 20 times as much. I told her so plainly, and she exclaimed,
"Very good. You have made an offer."
"Yes, but not for half a year. Only by the month."
"Oh, I must think of that, then."
It was in my mind that she had a fancy to play me the trick of making me engage myself, when in fact she had annihilated the papers. There was a moment when my suspense on this point was so acute that I all but broke out with the question. She was such a subtle old witch that one could never tell where one stood with her. Just after she had said she would think of my proposal, she drew out of her pocket with an embarrassed hand a small object wrapped in crumpled white paper. She asked,
"Do you know much about the old gimcracks that people pay so much for today? Do you know the kind of price they bring?"
I thought I saw what was coming, but I said ingenuously, "Do you want to buy something?"
"No, I want to sell. What would an amateur give me for that?"
She unfolded the white paper and made a motion for me to take from her a small oval portrait, and she added,
"I would part with it only for a good price."
At the first glance I recognized Geoffrey Aspern, and I was well aware that I flushed with the act. As she was watching me, however, I had the consistency to exclaim, "What a striking face! Do tell me who it is."
"It's an old friend of mine, a very distinguished man in his day. He gave it to me himself, but I'm afraid to mention his name lest you never should have heard of him."
She was, perhaps, amazed at my assurance, but I was surprised at hers, at her having the energy, in her state of health and at her time of life, to wish to sport with me simply for her private entertainment. I could not believe that she really cared for any information I might give her. What she wished was to dangle it before my eyes and put a prohibitive price on it. "The face comes back to me. It torments me," I said, turning the object this way and that, and looking at it very critically. It was a careful but not a supreme work of art, representing a young man with a remarkably handsome face, in a high-collared green coat and a buff waistcoat. I judged the picture to have been painted when the model was about 25 years old. There are, as all the world knows, 3 other portraits of the poet in existence, but none of them is of so early a date as this. "He strikes me for all the world as a celebrity," I said. "Wasn't he a writer? Surely he's a poet." I was determined that it should be she, not I, who should first pronounce Geoffrey Aspern's name. Miss Bordereau neglected to answer my question, but raised her hand to take back the picture with a peremptory gesture.
"It's only a person who should know for himself that would give me my price,"
she said with a certain dryness. "Oh, then you have a price." I did not restore the precious thing. We looked at each other hard while I retained it.
"I know the least I would take. What it occurred to me to ask you about is the most I shall be able to get."
She made a movement, drawing herself together as if in a spasm of dread at having lost her treasure, she were going to attempt the immense effort of rising to snatch it from me. I instantly placed it in her hand again, saying as I did so, "I should like to have it myself, but with your ideas I could never afford it." She turned the small oval plate over in her lap, and I thought I saw her catch her breath a little, as if she had had a strain or an escape. This, however, did not prevent her saying in a moment, "You would buy a likeness of a person you don't know, by an artist who has no reputation?" "The artist may have no reputation, but that thing is wonderfully well painted," I replied, to give myself a reason.
"It's lucky you thought of saying that, because the painter was my father."
Aspern had, of course, met the young lady when he went to her father's studio as a sitter. I observed to Miss Bordereau that if she would entrust me with her property for 24 hours, I should be happy to take advice upon it. But she made no answer to this, save to slip it in silence into her pocket. "Well, at any rate, I hope you will not offer it without giving me notice," I said as she remained irresponsive. "Remember that I am a possible purchaser."
"I should want your money first," she returned with unexpected rudeness.
Miss Tina now appeared on the threshold of the old woman's parlour. She stood looking down at her companion with a sort of helpless wonder, as if all their years of familiarity had not made her perversities any more easy to follow.
"I don't know what to do with her," she declared. "She is so easily tired, and yet she has begun to roam, to drag herself about the house. I know what I'm about. I'm not losing my mind." "I dare say you would like to think so," said Miss Bordereau with a cynical little sigh. "You are very tired. You will certainly be ill tonight," cried Miss Tina. "Nonsense, my dear. I feel better at this moment than I have done for a month. Tomorrow I shall come out again. I want to be where I can see this clever gentleman."
"Shouldn't you perhaps see me better in your sitting room?" I inquired.
"Don't you mean shouldn't you have a better chance at me?" she returned, fixing me a moment with her green shade. "I look at you, but I don't see you. I want to watch you. I want to watch you," the old lady went on. "But I've seen you enough for today. I'm satisfied. Now I'll go home."
Miss Tina laid her hands on the back of her aunt's chair and began to push, but I begged her to let me take her place.
"Oh, yes, you may move me this way. You shan't in any other," Miss Bordereau exclaimed as she felt herself propelled firmly and easily over the smooth, hard floor. When we had entered the parlour, Miss Tina told me that she should now be able to manage. I confess I was guilty of lingering. It held me there to think that I was nearer the documents I coveted. The place had indeed a bareness which did not suggest hidden treasures. There were no dusky nooks, nor curtained corners, no massive cabinets, nor chests with iron bands. Moreover, it was possible, it was perhaps even probable, that the old lady had consigned her relics to her bedroom, to some battered box that was shoved under the bed, to the drawer of some lame dressing table, where they would be in the range of vision by the dim night lamp. Nonetheless, I scrutinized every article of furniture, every conceivable cover for a hoard, and in particular a tall old secretary with brass ornaments, a receptacle somewhat rickety, but still capable of keeping a great many secrets. I stared at it so hard that Miss Tina noticed me and changed color. Her doing this made me think I was right, and that wherever they might have been before, the Aspern Papers at that moment languished behind the peevish little lock. It was hard to remove my eyes from the dull mahogany front, when I reflected that a simple panel divided me from the goal of my hopes. But I remembered my prudence, and with an effort took leave of Miss Bordereau. Just as I had finished my dinner, Miss Bordereau's niece appeared, unannounced, in the open doorway of the room in which my simple repasts were served. She seized me as I rose to meet her by the arm. "My aunt is very ill. I think she is dying." "Never in the world," I answered bitterly. "Don't you be afraid." "Do go for a doctor, do. The maid is gone for the one we always have, but she doesn't come back. Apparently she is following him all over Venice. I don't know what to do. She looks so as if she was sinking." I hurried downstairs with her, and on the way she told me that an hour after I quitted them in the afternoon, Miss Bordereau had had an attack of oppression, a terrible difficulty in breathing, which had left her so exhausted that she seemed all gone. I repeated that she was not gone, that she would not go yet, whereupon Miss Tina gave me a sharper sidelong glance than she had ever directed at me, and wanted to know what I had done to her. Her aunt had told her that I had made her so angry. I declared that I couldn't think what she was angry with me for, unless for not seeing my way to give £1,000 for the portrait of Geoffrey Aspern. "And did she show you that? Oh, gracious, oh, dearie me." I said that I would give anything to possess it, yet that I had not £1,000.
but I stopped when we came to the door of her aunt's room. I did not waste my time in considering Miss Bordereau, in whom the appearance of respiration was so slight as to suggest that no human attention could ever help her more. I turned my eyes all over the room, rummaging with them the closets, the chests of drawers, the tables. Miss Tina met them quickly and read, I think, what was in them, but she did not answer it, turning away anxiously, so that I felt rebuked for a preoccupation that was almost profane in the presence of our dying companion. All the same, I took another look, endeavoring to pick out mentally the place to try first for a person who should wish to put his hand on Miss Bordereau's papers directly after her death. The room was a dire confusion. There were clothes hanging over chairs, odd-looking shabby bundles here and there, and various pasteboard boxes piled together, battered, bulging, and discolored, which might have been 50 years old. Miss Tina, after a moment, noticed the direction of my eyes again and said,
"She likes it this way. We can't move things. There are old bandboxes she has had most of her life."
Then she added, half taking pity on my real thought,
"Those things were there."
And she pointed to a small, low trunk which stood under a sofa, a queer, superannuated coffer of painted wood, with elaborate handles and shriveled straps, and with the color much rubbed off. "Were there? They aren't now?" I asked, startled by Miss Tina's implication. At that moment, the doctor came in. He looked particularly at me, so that I bowed to him and left him with the women, going down to smoke a cigar in the garden. I wandered about in the alleys. The warm night had come on, smoking cigar after cigar and looking at the light in Miss Bordereau's windows. Was the old woman dying? Or was she already dead? It made me uneasy not to be nearer, as if I thought the doctor himself might carry away the papers with him. I bit my cigar hard as it came over me again that perhaps there were now no papers to carry. I went upstairs at last. The door of Miss Bordereau's apartment was open, showing from the parlor the dimness of a poor candle. I went toward it with a light tread, and at the same moment Miss Tina appeared and stood looking at me as I approached.
She's better, she said, even before I had asked. "The doctor has given her something. She woke up, came back to life while he was there."
"Is she conscious again? Does she speak?"
"No, she doesn't speak, but she takes my hand. She holds it fast."
"Yes," I rejoined. "I can see what force she still has by the way she grabbed that picture this afternoon." There was something I desired immensely to ask her. So I proposed that we should walk a little in the sala, where we should not disturb the old lady. We strolled through the fine superfluous hall, where on the marble floor, particularly as at first we said nothing, our footsteps were more audible than I had expected. I opened the window, and we passed out onto the balcony. The air of the canal seemed even heavier. The place was hushed and void. The quiet neighborhood had gone to sleep. A lamp here and there over the narrow black water glimmered in double. Presently a gondola passed along the canal with its slow, rhythmical plash, and as we listened, we watched it in silence. After it had gone on, I said to Miss Tina, "And where are they now, the things that were in the trunk?"
"In the trunk?"
"That green box you pointed out to me in her room. You said her papers had been there. You seemed to imply that she had transferred them."
"Oh, yes. They are not in the trunk," said Miss Tina. "I have looked. For you."
"How, for me?"
"Dear Miss Tina, do you mean you would have given them to me if you had found them?"
I asked, almost trembling. She delayed to reply, and I waited. Suddenly she broke out, "I don't know what I would do, what I wouldn't." "Would you look again? Somewhere else?"
I can't, while she lies there. It isn't decent."
"No, it isn't decent," I replied gravely. "Let the poor lady rest in peace." And the words on my lips were not hypocritical, for I felt reprimanded and shamed. Miss Tina added in a moment, "I can't deceive her that way. Perhaps on her deathbed." "Heaven forbid I should ask you, though I have been guilty myself." "You have been guilty?" "I have sailed under false colors." I felt I must now tell her that I had given her an invented name, on account of my fear that her aunt would have heard of me and would refuse to take me in. I explained this, and also that I had really been a party to the letter written to them by John Cumnor months before. She listened with great attention. I thought she was perhaps going to say that we had been very base, but she remarked after a moment in a candid, wondering way, "How much you must want them." "Oh, I do, passionately," I conceded, smiling. And I went on, forgetting my compunction of a moment before. "How can she possibly have changed their place herself? How can she walk? How can she lift and carry things?" "Oh, when one wants and when one has so much will," said Miss Tina, as if in the dead of night or at some moment when the coast was clear, the old woman had been capable of a miraculous effort. Suddenly she said to me, "I feel as if you were a new person, now that you have got a new name. I do like it better." "Oh, if you didn't, I would almost go on with the other." "Would you really?" I laughed again, but for all answer to this inquiry, I said, "Of course, if she can rummage about that way, she can perfectly have burnt them." "You must wait. You must wait," Miss Tina moralized mournfully. "Of course, if the papers are gone, that's no use." "Naturally. But if you could only find out," I groaned, quivering again. We were diverted by seeing the doctor's gondola shoot into the little canal and approach the house. I left Miss Tina to go off with him, only asking her leave to come back later for news. I went out of the house and took a long walk as far as the piazza, where my restlessness declined to quit me. I could only walk round and round, and I did so 6 times. I was uncomfortable, but it gave me a certain pleasure to have told Miss Tina who I really was. At last I took my way home again. It was considerably past midnight when I reached my door. The sala, upstairs, was as dark as usual, and my lamp as I crossed it found nothing satisfactory to show me. I went nearer the door. I stopped there and listened. I heard nothing at all, and at last I tapped gently. No answer came, and after another minute I turned the handle. If I have candidly narrated the importunities, the indelicacies of which my desire to possess myself of Geoffrey Aspern's papers had rendered me capable, I need not shrink from confessing this last indiscretion. I think it was the worst thing I did. The door of Miss Bordereau's room was open, and I could see beyond it the faintness of a taper. There was no sound. My footstep caused no one to stir. I came further into the room. I lingered there with my lamp in my hand. I had no definite purpose, no bad intention, but I felt myself held to the spot by an acute, though absurd, sense of opportunity. It came to me that I was now, perhaps alone, unmolested, at the hour of temptation and secrecy, nearer to the tormenting treasure than I had ever been. I held up my lamp, let the light play on the different objects as if it could tell me something. I stopped in front of the secretary, looking at it very idiotically, for what had it to say to me after all? In the first place it was locked, and in the second it almost surely contained nothing in which I was interested. 10 to 1 the papers had been destroyed, and even if they had not been destroyed, the old woman would not have put them in such a place as that after removing them from the green trunk. The secretary was more conspicuous, more accessible. It opened with a key, but there was a little brass handle like a button as well. I saw this as I played my lamp over it. I caught a glimpse of the possibility that Miss Tina wished me really to understand. If she did not wish me to understand, if she wished me to keep away, Why had she not locked the door of communication between the sitting room and the sala? That would have been a definite sign that I was to leave them alone. If I did not leave them alone, she meant me to come for a purpose now indicated by the quick, fantastic idea that to oblige me, she had unlocked the secretary. She had not left the key, but the lid would probably move if I touched the button. I did not propose to do anything, not in the least, to let down the lid. I only wanted to test my theory, to see if the cover would move. I touched the button with my hand, and as I did so, it is embarrassing for me to relate it, I looked over my shoulder. It was a chance, an instinct, for I had not heard anything. Miss Bordereau stood there in her nightdress, in the doorway of her room, watching me. Her hands were raised. She had lifted the everlasting curtain that covered half her face, and for the first, the last, the only time, I beheld her extraordinary eyes. They glared at me. They made me horribly ashamed. I never shall forget her strange little bent, white, tottering figure, with its lifted head, her attitude, her expression. Neither shall I forget the tone in which, as I turned, looking at her, she hissed out, passionately, furiously, "Ah, you publishing scoundrel!" I know not what I stammered, to excuse myself, to explain, but I went toward her, to tell her I meant no harm. She waved me off with her old hands, retreating before me in horror, and the next thing I knew, she had fallen back with a quick spasm, as if death had descended on her, into Miss Tina's arms. It had been devilish awkward to be found by Miss Bordereau in the dead of night examining her bureau. I left Venice the next morning, as soon as I learned that she had not succumbed to the shock. But I said to myself that after all I could not abandon Miss Tina, and the end of it was that I did return to Venice on the 12th day. My servant poked out his head from a window when I reached the house. "They have put her into the earth, la vecchia," he said, and he grinned as if he knew I should be pleased at the news. "She's dead?" I exclaimed. "When was the funeral?" "The order yesterday." I found Miss Tina in the garden, walking about and picking the flowers quite as if they belonged to her, and passed half an hour with her. Really, not much passed between us save the recognition of her bereavement. She told me her aunt had died very peacefully at the last, and when we had gone into this, she asked me about my Giro, the places I had seen. I told her what I could, making it up partly, I'm afraid, as in my depression I had not seen much. And after she had heard me, she exclaimed, "Dear, dear, how much I should like to take a little journey." I remarked that some excursion might be managed. We would think of it, talk it over. I said never a word to her about the Aspern documents. It was not that I was not on pins and needles to know, but that I thought it more decent not to betray my anxieties so soon after the catastrophe. When we separated in the garden, I asked her if she had any general plan. "Oh, yes, but I haven't settled anything yet," she replied quite cheerfully. Was her cheerfulness explained by the impression that I would settle for her? The following morning was splendid, with something in the air that told of the waning of the long Venetian summer, a freshness from the sea which stirred the flowers in the garden and made a pleasant draught in the house. It was the beginning of autumn, the end of my experiment, when I should learn if the papers had been reduced to ashes. After that, there would be nothing left for me but to leave. For seriously, I could not linger there to act as guardian to a piece of middle-aged female helplessness. If she had not saved the papers, wherein should I be indebted to her? When at last Miss Tina came out, I told her that I had been waiting for her, and she asked why I had not let her know. What I said was virtually the truth, that I was too nervous, since I expected her now to settle my fate. "Your fate," said Miss Tina, giving me a queer look. And as she spoke, I noticed a rare change in her. She was less natural, as if something had happened to her during the night that affected her relations with me, made them more embarrassing and complicated. "I mean about our papers. Are there any? You must know now." "Yes, there are a great many. More than I supposed." "Do you mean that you have got them in there? And that I may see them?" "I don't think you can see them," said Miss Tina, as if the dearest hope she had in the world now was that I would not take them from her. But what had I come back to Venice for but to see them? To take them? "I have got them, but I can't show them," she added. She hesitated, and then she said, "She tried to burn them, but I prevented it. But she told me she charged me. Oh, it was terrible." "Did you tell her you would burn them?" "No, I didn't, on purpose." "And what good will you have done me if, after all, you won't show them?" "Oh, none. I know that." "And did she believe you had destroyed them?" "I don't know what she believed at the last. I couldn't tell. She was too far gone. But here's the portrait. You may have that," Miss Tina announced, taking the little picture out of her pocket. "But it's worth money. A large sum." "Well," said Miss Tina, still with her strange look, "you are very generous." "Well, you have made a great difference for me," said Miss Tina. I looked at Geoffrey Aspern's face in the little picture. "Is this a bribe to make me give up the papers? Much as I value it, if I were to be obliged to choose, the papers are what I should prefer. But ever so much." Miss Tina shook her head. "I'm afraid," she quavered suddenly. "I'm afraid she was terrible when she was angry." "Well, it can't be helped. I must renounce. Naturally, you will understand if I give up my rooms. I leave Venice immediately." And I took up my hat, which I had placed on a chair. A kind of spasm came into her. "Immediately? Do you mean today?" The words were a cry of desolation. Then, controlling herself, she added, "She wanted to say something to me the last day, something very particular, but she couldn't. Something more about the papers." "And did you guess?" "No, I don't know. I have thought all kinds of things." "And for instance?" "Well, that if you were a relation, it would be different." "If I were a relation?" "If you were not a stranger, then it would be the same for you as for me. Anything that is mine would be yours, and you could do what you like." At first I failed to follow. But after a moment, a light came into my mind. It was embarrassing, and I bent my head over Geoffrey Aspern's portrait. What an odd expression was in his face. "Get out of it as you can, my dear fellow." I put the picture into the pocket of my coat and said to Miss Tina, "Yes, I'll sell it for you. I shan't get £1,000 by any means, but I shall get something good." She looked at me with tears in her eyes, but she seemed to try to smile as she remarked, "We can divide the money. She was very fond of me. She wanted me to be happy, and if any person should be kind to me, she wanted to speak of that." I was almost awe-stricken at the astuteness with which the good lady found herself inspired. "She knew I should like it if you could carry out your idea," Miss Tina went on. "You could see the things. You could use them." She stopped long enough for me to give some sign, which I did not give. "I don't know what to do. I'm too tormented. I'm too ashamed." Then, turning away from me and burying her face in her hands, she burst into a flood of tears. I stood there dumb, watching her while her sobs resounded in the great empty hall. I would give you everything, and she would understand. She would forgive me. Miss Tina, Miss Tina, I stammered. I made a wild, vague movement towards the door. I stood there saying, "It wouldn't do. It wouldn't do." The next thing I remember is that I was downstairs and out of the house. My gondola was there, and to the man's usual, "Dove comanda?" I replied in a tone that made him stare, "Anywhere, anywhere, out into the lagoon." He rowed me away, and I sat there groaning softly to myself with my hat pulled over my face. What did she mean if she did not mean to offer me her hand? That was the price. That was the price. I could not accept. I could not, for a bundle of tattered papers, marry a ridiculous, pathetic, provincial old woman. As the day went on, I grew to wish that I had never heard of Aspern's relics, and I cursed the extravagant curiosity that had put John Cumnor on the scent of them. I was lost in wonder at the importance I had attached to Miss Bordereau's crumpled scraps. The thought of them became odious to me, and I was as vexed with the old witch for the superstition that had prevented her from destroying them as I was with myself for attempting to control their fate. During my sleep, a very odd revulsion took place in my spirit. I found myself aware of this almost as soon as I opened my eyes. It made me jump out of my bed with the movement of a man who remembers that he has left the house door ajar. Was I still in time to save my goods? They were now more precious than ever, and a kind of ferocity had come into my desire to possess them. It was absurd to turn away helpless from the idea that the only way to get hold of the papers was to unite myself to her for life. I would not unite myself, and yet I would have them. Miss Tina received me in her aunt's forlorn parlor. As soon as I came into the room, I saw that her sense of her failure had produced a rare alteration in her, but I had been too full of stratagems and spoils to think of that. Now I took it in. She stood in the middle of the room, with a face of mildness bent upon me, and her look of forgiveness, of absolution, made her angelic. It beautified her. She was younger. She was not a ridiculous old woman. I heard a whisper somewhere in the depths of my conscience. Why not? After all, why not? It seemed to me I was ready to pay the price. Still more distinctly, however, than the whisper, I heard Miss Tina's own voice. At first I was not clearly aware of what she was saying. Then I recognized she had bade me goodbye. "Are you going today?" she asked. "But it doesn't matter. I shall not see you again. I don't want to." And she smiled strangely, with an infinite gentleness. She had never doubted that I had left her the day before in horror, and now she had the force of soul to smile at me in her abjection. "I have done the great thing. I have destroyed the papers." "Destroyed them?" "Yes. What was I to keep them for? I burned them last night, one by one, in the kitchen." "One by one?" "It took a long time. There were so many." The room seemed to go round me as she said this, and a real darkness for a moment descended upon my eyes. When it passed, Miss Tina was there still, but the transfiguration was over, and she had changed back to a plain, dingy, elderly person. It was in this character she spoke as she said, "I can't stay with you longer. I can't." And it was in this character she turned her back upon me as I had turned mine upon her 24 hours before, and moved to the door of her room. Here she did what I hadn't done when I quitted her. She paused long enough to give me one look. I have never forgotten it, and I sometimes still suffer from it, though it was not resentful. No. There was no resentment, nothing hard or vindictive in poor Miss Tina. For when, later, I sent her as the price of the portrait of Geoffrey Aspern a larger sum of money than I had hoped to be able to gather for her, writing to her that I had sold the picture, she kept it with thanks. I wrote her that I had sold the picture, but it hangs above my writing table. When I look at it, I can scarcely bear my loss. I mean of the precious papers.